Welcome to the second plenary for the JPI Urban Europe Conference. My name is James Mawson, founder and editor-in-chief of our Mawsonia and its publications Global Corporate Venturing, Global University Venturing and Global Impact Venturing. It's a great pleasure to be moderating three global superstars in many ways on this topic of the role of neighbourhoods, towns, municipalities and cities in urban transitions. And I'll start with three Q&A discussions with the three speakers before we go to a quick poll for the audience. So get thinking about questions you might want to ask the audience, put it in the chat function, and also get on the app, menti.com app, in order to be able to answer the Menti question before we start the final 20-minute Q&A. But I start with an interview with Caroline Nevejan, who's the Chief Science Officer with the City of Amsterdam. And so welcome, Caroline.
Thank you.
It's a great pleasure. As one of the initiators of the City Science Initiative, I wanted to find out a little bit more about what's been going on in Amsterdam around this initiative, which aims to strengthen the impact of science for urban policy making. What are your experiences in science policy cooperation? What could connect the CSI and the driving urban transitions? But I think you have some slides to provide some context here.
Maybe I just do a few minutes of slides and then we can have a talk.
Exactly.
Clara, can you give me my first slide? Yes. Thank you very much for having me. I'm indeed the Chief Science Officer of the Municipality of Amsterdam, and I'm also a professor by special appointment in the University of Amsterdam on the issue of designing urban experience. As Chief Science Officer, I combine, bring synergy to the big challenges that cities face, big transitions that we all know, and the research that's happening in the university. And what's interesting is that we found, maybe you can have the next slide, that in the last 5 years, many of these cities that you see here, big cities, small cities, regions of cities, have made this new position of Chief Science Officer. It has many different names, and every country has a new word for it. But we found that actually the municipalities, the cities and the regions have realized we need more research to be able to handle the transitions that we face. Next slide. So we brought together a lot of people. Here you see also all the DJs that were part of this quest. Also, Margaret from GPI was there every time. Very happy that she was there. And all the networks that were joining. Next slide, please. And with this rather diverse group from north, south, east and west of Europe. Next slide, please. We embarked into exploration of what is it that we do. And we found that actually in every city, you see we had 3 conferences and then we had 5 conferences online where we explored thematic issues. And the first thing was really to identify what is our practice currently. Next, please. And what we found is that we can really say that to do research in the city on the challenges with and of the city, it's a very specific kind of research. We actually argue now that it needs its own paradigm because it's integral from the start. I mean, climate adaptation is also about poverty. It's also about energy. It's also about business. It's about planning. So you see that in the city, every challenge is an integral nature, that we need different kinds of knowledge for the solutions. And that design plays a very important role to design interventions and processes. And what we also see that we all need more and better data. So you see that the cities professionally gather data often, where universities have the internationally reviewed good methodologies. So the process of city science, where every step of the research process is defined by this interaction, we see happening in all these 35 cities and regions. Next slide. So here you see the process where the red buttons, I don't know if you see them big, I see them small. The red is the research process, the green is the design process, and the blue is the policy process. And everyone who is engaged with research in cities will recognize that the pace of policy making and the pace of research is often very hard to match. And we have found that design actually plays a very interesting intermediate role in this. Next, please. Here you see we made portraits, how we organize it, and what we find is whether we are in Paris or in Hamburg or in Lublin or in Cluj or in Reggio, we find that in all these cities, there is a small group between 5 and 10 people who are like they put the oil in the radars of the collaborations. They find the calls, they know which person to connect to which person. They also well connected in the city, well connected to the business in the city, and they are capable of building and orchestrating these consortia. Next, please. So we also realize that we face the same challenge, which is that governance and finance between city and university is not easy to do, even though you're both public bodies. That learning and communication is quite hard because we're all large organizations, so it's very easily fragmented again. That we need this new research paradigm, that the data exchange need is really profound. And what's interesting is that we're all faced with the limited agency of the city. So maybe through science and collaborations you find you can do something, but then you also have to be aware that the European Commission, for example, is bound by nation states, United Nations too, but we also have trade agreements, so the agency is quite limited sometimes. Next, please. Here you see the thematic workshops we did to see whether we could really bring it to another level, how we want to create this third space where and Commission and cities and networks and universities together think about a research agenda for Europe. Yes, please. So we have asked, and we just wrote a report that you can also download from the website openresearch.amsterdam, or you go to the City Science Initiative at the European Commission. So we have asked for that. We want to have more translation of European research fit to city challenges, that we need more support in making applicable solutions. So you have something you find in research, you want to make it applicable. We also think that on the local level, we need to train people to better formulate questions. And we think that we need to support the instruments with the collaboration for cities is really important. So far as a city, in a lot of GPI calls, definitely, you can only be a public partner. So you're sort of only valorization, where actually as a city scientist or someone doing research in cities or regions, you need a much deeper connection to the research. You have to be part of setting the agenda, developing the methodologies, being part of the validation. So that acquires another kind of partnership that till now is provided for. So we argue that cities are research partners in their own right. Last slide, please. And this, so there's a lot of potential. These 35 cities now exchanging a lot of ideas. It's a communication environment, a learning environment, a sounding board, because it's a space that's not about money, it's about thinking together how we better develop our own local practices and in the context of Europe as well. It's a catalyst for generating challenges. It's a bridge and it's a manifestation of European of life to which evidence-based policymaking is core. And the last slide shows the signatures of all the mayors who sent this to the 3 commissioners in the European Commission about 4 weeks ago, and we are waiting for their response. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, Caroline, that's really helpful. We've got a question from the audience, just whether it'd be possible for you to share the presentation with people afterwards? Okay.
Yes, Clara can take care of that.
Perfect. That's really kind. So just very briefly, obviously, we're talking about the City Science Initiative, and you mentioned Margit Knows on the chair, the management board for the JPI. How does it connect up between the initiative and the Driving Urban Transitions, the JPI EC plan?
Well, I think what's interesting is that this initiative, we've been doing this for 2 years now. And I think a lot of people, like the people from GPI, like Margit, but also from DG Reggio, from GRC, a lot of people from Research and Innovation have attended our meetings. So I think the urban agenda in many ways is now rising on the priority list. So that's really important. And I think the fact that we ask also for scientifically for a response to how you can do cities in a good way. I often say to colleagues that the level of complexity that a civil servant has to deal with in 1 hour, a scientist doesn't have to deal with in a week.
Very true.
It's quite important to realize this. Yeah? So researchers, they are very happy in their tower. I'm also a researcher. I love my ivory tower. It's very nice to be there. But it's sometimes very hard. And another thing, in transition, you also see that science is sometimes really slow.
Yeah.
So I sometimes, especially in the transition, like circular economy or energy transition or so, sometimes the civil servants know more and are more up to date and are better familiar with the state of the art, latest research, than some of the researchers. So it's also quite something to deal with.
That's really helpful. Well, we'll come to more of this in the panel discussion a little bit, but I'll now turn to Inga, who's the mayor of Kuldiga in Latvia. Perhaps you can give a little bit of an introduction, Inga, about sort of Kuldiga and where you're coming from, and I think Clara's on hand if you need to show video.
Yeah, hi. I'm representing Kuldiga, the municipality in Latvia of around 24,000 inhabitants. Our priority is sustainable development, including localization of United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I would like to share with you our latest video on the Sustainable Development Goals produced by our municipal council in cooperation with local youth in the framework of the European Days of Local Solidarity.
Nice.
Šis jautājums mums uztrauc jau sen.
Mēs esam izvirzījuši mērķus labākai nākotnei.
Un to sauc par SDG. Mēs, Kuldigas novadā, esam par veselīgu un aktīvu dzīvesveidu visiem vecuma cilvēkiem.
Okay. I think there's a little bit of latency there, Inga. So perhaps I can ask to share a little bit more about Kuldiga and how do you see this situation? I think it's coming through now.
Šis jautājums mums uztrauc jau sen.
Mēs esam izvirzījuši mērķus labākai nākotnei.
Un to sauc par SDG. Mēs, Kuldigas novadā, esam par veselīgu un aktīvu dzīvesveidu visiem vecuma cilvēkiem.
Par labu darbu un ekonomikas izaugsmu.
Mēs esam par vienlīdzīgu attieksmi pret visiem cilvēkiem un visām valstīm.
Iekļaujošu un kvalitatīvu izglītību visu vecuma un statusu cilvēkiem.
Mēs vēlamies padarīt visas novada teritorijas drošas.
Dzimuma līdztiesība, jo sievietes loma nav tikai ģimenes dzīves veidošanā.
Mēs esam par mieru un taisnīgumu.
Mēs esam par atjaunojumu enerģiju.
Mēs esam par dzīvību uz zemes.
Mēs par inovācijām un infrastruktūru.
Mēs esam pret klimatu pārmaiņām.
Nodrošināsim atbildīgus patēriņu paradumus. Pirksim tik daudz, tikai cik varam patērēt, ne vairāk.
Mēs Kuldigā par tīru ūdeni.
Mēs esam par dzīvību ūdenī.
Un visnoslēdzot par sadarbību šo iepriekš minēto mērķu īstenošanai.
Mēs vēlamies, lai šis nebūtu tikai kārtējais video, ko jūs noskatāties, bet mēs vēlamies, lai jūs pārdomātu dzirdēto un redzēto un veiktu izmaiņas arī savā ikdienā.
Can't hear you. Can't hear you. What is wrong? Can you hear me? No.
We can, but not James.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
For some reason, it seems that. Anyway, thank you so much for that. Joys of modern technology. So Inga, I was going to ask, there seems to be a lot of pressure on cities and their policymakers, but what do you see as the opportunities as well as the pressures?
No, we can't hear you.
I think when they played the video, I think everyone got muted. So you might have to go to...
No, it's okay?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. We are now living in a very unusual and challenging time. My generation has not experienced war and hunger in my country and municipality, but right now in the context of the COVID pandemic, we feel like in a war. Only the enemy is invisible. Municipalities are the closest to inhabitants and need to be able to address an infinite number of issues. During the first wave of the pandemic, Latvia was in a relatively good situation. But this autumn, the situation has changed dramatically. At the end of September and beginning of October, the largest outbreak of coronavirus in Latvia was in Kuldiga, in one enterprise and special school. In a few days, more than 100 infected people were identified, which is a huge number for our population. In cooperation with the laboratory and using the staged support program, we have implemented in Kuldiga a pilot project. In 3 days, we have tested about 5,000 people with saliva tests. Saliva tests are easy to perform, don't require the presence of doctor, and are painless. As a result, we identified the majority of those infected in collaboration with the Center for Disease Prevention and Control and imposed a 14-day quarantine. At the moment, we are controlling the situation and it is absolutely stable. And there are only few infected persons from time to time. Epidemiologists highlight Kuldiga as a very good example. Without the involvement of the municipality, it is impossible to implement such a project. We provided premises for receiving and handing over analyses, assigned the municipal police to help, addressed the inhabitants, explained, cooperated with public and private institutions. Kuldiga is a tourist destination, as you saw in video, with the oldest waterfall, historical bridge, old town on the way to the UNESCO status, cozy cafes. Tourism in Kuldiga was put on pause. The banks of our Vanda River remained empty in the golden autumn. The COVID outbreak stopped everything. We invested a lot of work in negotiations with our tourism entrepreneurs as well as the media. 2 weeks later, when the outbreak was stopped, putting the great efforts, we have also managed to return tourists. And our local entrepreneurs thanked us a lot. I hope maybe that our experience in controlling COVID in small municipalities will be useful for others as well.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much for that, Inga. And within the video, you showed the 17 SDGs. Where do you see the biggest potential to improve sustainability lies? What are your key actions?
First of all, we have to shape a better way of living for the world tomorrow, and for the transformation and innovation are key words. The European Union's priorities, European Green Deal and Digital Europe, are providing excellent basis for common actions, cooperation and exchange of ideas. Information is the golden key for the municipality to be proactive and increase its potential to use the opportunities offered by the European Union and its targeted funding in the framework of the European Green Deal.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for that, Inga. We'll come to more question and answer in the panel discussion. I'll now turn to the third of our keynote speakers beforehand. But just while we're doing so, there's a question for Caroline in the question and answer chat function. You might be able to answer before we get to it. It's about your initiative and whether it can expand to other cities. So I now have the great pleasure to interview Mikael Jansson, who's Director for the North Sweden European Office. Welcome, Mikael.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for being able to join. We found that cities are embedded in the wider region and they play important roles as regional hubs. This goes far beyond the city hinterland or urban-rural relationship. It includes cooperation of functional urban areas and regions, multi-level governance, and integrated processes and decision-making. So, Mikael, what role do you see that urban transition processes play for the regions?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to take part today representing the Arctic Europe. I think I have maybe some other angles on some things, and I think it's important to start with that all regions do have cities, small or large. Europe is not the continent of mega cities, it's rather small and medium-sized cities. And I think that is also really the European unique innovation system to build on. And of course, cities act and work as drivers and marketplace for the surrounding regions. And one hand, in most cases, the cities are still dependent on the regions and the local regional economy. On the other hand, they are, of course, they act as motors for the larger region. So the cities are important for the regions, of course, and work as transition and Green Deal and so forth, of course, affects everyone and all the regions. But I think it's important that regional focus do not stop there. Of course, the cities need own platforms, and of course, the cities are the main drivers, for sure, for many processes. But it does not happen in a vacuum. And I think that the OECD are off track of something when they say that 68% of the growth happens outside the urban areas. A growth that has not been recognized because, of course, the big staples and the big growth happens in the cities. But it is, in the end, a common ecosystem, in my view, and it's cities, suburban, villages in different rural settings that make the regional setting. And especially if you are to create true transition and sustainable society, you have to take all this into account. And it is a tricky balance from the regions to avoid this traditional divide between the cities and the rest, and really challenge all to engage. And I see that EU and national level also have to take the act together here. And I can see that in Sweden, for example, now there is a movement or actions to create national hubs to support regions to make better use of, for example, EU's innovation funds. And that is something positive, in my view, to build on, to have this more holistic ecosystem view.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Mikael. And where do you see the biggest potential to improve regional sustainability and benefits? You know, what are your key actions?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the connectivity and the energy mix are key actions for sustainability, and I think we are in a positive side is that in our regions we do have advantages of hydropower and windmill plants, space for windmill plants, and heavy process industry that also delivers direct heating possibilities and so forth. And I think that also already shows the interdependency between the regions and around the cities to make this. But on the other hand, for us, it's the connectivity that is the challenge, both transport and infrastructure and digital infrastructure. And I mean, our cities are, due to their size, very much these so-called 50-minute cities already. The challenge is the interconnection with the hinterland, where the EU funds have been very important, not least for broadband expansion. And that has in turn made it possible to do things that otherwise wouldn't have been possible. And I think that is why we also are quite high on the EU innovation scoreboards in our regions. Not least due, and especially now in the COVID-19 situation, the possibilities for distance planning technology within the e-health, that also can be scaled up. Large cities is important to say, because for us, it's really the distance. In Central Europe, it's the congestions, and both are time thieves and greenhouse emitters. But I would also want to say that I think sustainability is more than then green transition, I mean, life quality in the city, and also the connection to possibilities to have recreation areas outside the cities are extremely important for the well-being of people in the city. So it's really about the environmentally, economical, and not least social sustainability, I would say, within the cities, but also for the region to really be able to secure long-term sustainable development also for the cities. And I would say that this ongoing process that we are engaged in, and also together with the EU on the social index, is quite interesting. That's an instrument to follow the development and see where to make investments, and in education and gender balance. And I think our focus on investments in gender issues has really regions that are by tradition quite male-dominated in the industry sector has very much been important for a more balanced, sustainable development that we can see nowadays.
It's really helpful. Thanks, Mikael. And you mentioned obviously the importance of the EU around things like broadband. How do you think regions can help mobilise support for smaller cities or towns or villages to help them transform? And how do you think they might be able to benefit from some of the experiences of other cities, perhaps transnationally as well?
Yeah, I think, one interesting question is what is really a city? When EU decided to not lock the EIP smart cities for only cities about 250,000 inhabitants, which were on the table for the decisions, it also made it possible for our cities to take part in that platform. And today, Umeå in North Sweden, with about 130,000 inhabitants, is even a lighthouse city in the smart cities. I think the EU Commission, at least, has realized that you can really do things there that is maybe even difficult to do in the larger settings, and try new ways and engage people to take part as a testbed for Europe, really. Of course, not all settlement can be called cities, so it's good that we now talk smart villages but I think it's important to see how we can learn also between the large and small contexts. I think that is to some extent the strength of the EU, that the question is not how big are you, the question is what can you do and how can we collaborate to make a change. And the circular economy, for example, cannot happen on global level if it's not set in place in the local level. And the cities can be drivers, but the surrounding must also take part to deliver solutions. However, there is, of course, an imbalance between some stronger cities and many more vulnerable municipalities. And the true challenge is to really get the latter to be involved. And there I see that the regional level do have a responsibility to be more of a facilitator, building on the experience and actions in the cities. We see from the studies we have made with the OECD, for example, the need of connecting the more urban research-driven innovation to the more incremental rural innovation to close the gaps and cross-fertilize a more overall systematic, robust innovation ecosystem. It really also benefits both parts because it delivers more competitiveness to the rural areas to be better connected to the academia, and at the same time brings new thinking into the urban perspectives, as academic research is seldom very in itself innovative. And I see that there are many initiatives in the EU for cooperation between cities and cities to take global lead, and that is really important and something to support. But I would want really to see something similar also for villages and smaller municipalities, maybe via platforms on the regional level and together with the larger cities, because of course those smaller actors do not have the power to really, or own resources to really leverage things. So we need to find this way, and I think that is the one of the main issues for the futures. And because I know that the smaller communities and smaller villages and so on also wanted to be part of this European agenda, and I think they should be on board also to be able to influence EU policies and research focus.
That's really helpful. Well, thank you, Mikael. So as mentioned at the start, we'll now open up a poll for the audience. We've got a really interactive chat conversation going on. But Clara, if you can start the poll about, is too much attention paid to the larger cities, given Europe is primarily a place for smaller ones of 100,000 to 1 million people. So this is the, if you go to menti.com, and use the code 3126177 on your smartphone. You'll be able to join in the poll. It's easier to use the phone than it is to use the desktop. We'll give it another little bit of time for people to be able to find the right app and be able to join. But we did some of these Menti polls beforehand. So right, we'll stop there to ask the Inga, Mikael, and Caroline, what do you think in terms of the results? Was that what you expected? The audience, which is broadly made up of some of the sort of university, national government folks primarily interested in this space. Obviously, we asked at the start of the day their level of understanding of these types of urban transition issues, and they were a very advanced and sophisticated audience here. So broadly, they're saying yes, in some ways. There is a little bit too much attention given to the smaller ones to then the larger ones. There are relatively few saying no. There's a couple which are undecided, find it difficult to say, but seems to be a conclusion. So Caroline, perhaps I'll start with you from from your perspective, Amsterdam, one of the bigger cities. Do you think you outpunch your weight, as it were, or do you think?
Well, actually, we are one of those cities. We are 800,000 people in Amsterdam. So I always find these very hard questions. So it's really a question of perception and knowledge. I don't know enough. I don't know all the stakes. Maybe it's too much of a scientific answer. So I couldn't tell. The impression is that there's been a lot of attention always for agriculture, for the rural areas. So as a city, we feel sometimes that there is not enough attention for all the children who grow up in big cities. And in our report, we make the distinction between small cities, big cities. So small cities is less than 100,000. Between 100 and 1 million is the middle cities, and then you have the few very big cities. But I think the attention for growing up in urban areas, which 75% of the children of Europe do, which means that you have a different relation to nature, a different relation to the whole value chain of food, of garbage, of energy. I think there is not enough attention for this. And also growing up in this kind of context means has big impact on education. It has big impact on mobility, on connectivity, as you mentioned. And I think the farmers, sometimes it looks like Europe is about farming and fisheries, and that's also where it started. But I'm very happy there's more attention for the complexity in cities. So yes, cities are the problem. Cities are also part of the solution. So cities also bring people together. So there's also a lot of energy. That's where culture emerges. And I noticed that a lot of smaller cities also thrive on being connected to a city like Amsterdam, which is a larger middle city compared to a city of 100,000. So in our experience, the region is really important, but it's very nice to have a capital where the cultural and the business comes together. And then we all like to live a bit more in the outside, Cool. So I couldn't judge whether it's too much or not.
Well, it's very helpful, particularly the difference between the rural and city as a bigger picture within that. So thank you, Caroline. Inga, as a slightly smaller city, Kuldiga, what are your perspectives on this? I think you might be muted again.
Now it's okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, I think I could agree with audience. In Latvia, always we have discussions between small municipalities and big municipalities. Of course, if you compare with Amsterdam, Riga is maybe not a very big city, and Riga is maybe only big city in Latvia. Other municipalities is more smaller, and yes, always we have discussions. And I could agree that the larger cities, they have more possibilities to attract people, to attract specialists, and they have more possibilities to attract EU funds. And for smaller municipalities, it is more difficult. And it's why I think it is very, very important to look to these small municipalities and to help for no municipalities and people which living in these municipalities at all. And especially if we speak about EU, European different funds. Oh, yeah, it's easy.
Cool. And Mikael, perhaps you want to pick up that sort of regional issue Caroline touched on as well. I think you're muted as well currently, Mikael.
Yes, now I'm on, I hope. Yes. No, I don't think it's too much focus on cities or even larger cities. It has been too less focus on the other parts and on the more ecosystem that I'm talking about, and also the smaller communities and villages, and also what is a city. I mean, all regions do have cities that are motors and the drivers for transition, and we have to realize this and find ways so we do not talk about cities and the rest, even though of course each one needs different adapted platforms and support systems maybe, but I think it's important to see this in common. And I would just want to highlight the example that of course a small municipality can't do a lot of those things that the city can do. If we look for Umeå, for example, I mean, they take part in challenge themselves to be in the capital of culture, to engage in AI capital, in green capital, and have engage the citizens and challenge themselves to take part, not to win, but it's a part of their learning process in the transition for the future, and do it together with others. And I think what we lack today is how to make use of all these efforts from the city to really also be spread out, and the knowledge that we get and how to get the ecosystem to work. That is more my focus, even though I think it's extremely important that we have cities that really take charge and try to do things together with others.
That's really helpful, thank you. And there's some interesting conversation in the chat function, particularly around the issue of, as a researcher, maybe from the university perspective, how to answer the major pending question. What is the demand of research by the local authorities? Some good examples around Brussels and the city linking up with the 5 main universities there. But Caroline, given you wear 2 hats, one for the City of Amsterdam, one as a professor, how do you find that link between, effectively administrators probably working on a day-to-day level on the hot topics, researchers thinking perhaps a little bit longer term? How do you connect up what the operational questions can be and how to bring those research questions to that wider audience?
Yeah, thank you. It's very nice that Eric Corin is here, who's running the Brussels Institute, which is who's part of City Science Initiative, but who has a mirror model from Amsterdam.
Yeah.
So I am located in the municipality with one day in the university, where they are in the university and they work a lot with the municipality. But they work project-based, and they're like a scientific institute with very strong ties to the municipality, and embracing and engaging with it, if I say right, and otherwise Eric will correct me in the chat. I think that the fact that you see this movement in so many cities and regional areas, that science officers have emerged, shows that if we talk energy transition, we don't know how to do it. If we talk circular economy, we don't know how to do it. Yes, there are blueprints for new value chains. Yes, there are many kind of blueprints, but we are messy cities. So the energy people may make a very nice blueprint, but we don't own the soil. There are businesses. So the context in which you operate as a city is very complex, and it's a kind of complexity that scientific methodology has not interacted with a lot so far as we understand now. And so, an institution like the Brussels Institute, but also we have, for example, in Amsterdam, we have quite a lot of scientific institutes and academic workshops, as we call them, or energy labs, where there's this very strong connection between researchers and policymakers. And then you find that in the conversation, the right question emerges that's relevant at that moment in time, both for research as well as for the municipality. So I think because the challenges are so big, because also universities also have to make sure that they are legitimized, that we can use the results of research, because it's public money, it's a lot of money going in. So as a researcher, I also have to prove my value for society. And that's also, you see, as a movement. So for example, Inga, the movement of all universities of Europe, the capitals, they very strongly support the City Science Initiative, very strongly. Because you see, it is also a methodological renewal from a scientific perspective.
Okay, that's very helpful. And Inga, as mayor, how do you sort of encourage that cooperation between, in effect, your civil servants, the administration and researchers, and then join it up to that wider European perspective? What sort of leadership do you have to show in order to encourage that? You're muted at the moment, I think.
Sorry. Yes, I think it is very important to do it, and maybe I could tell you one example which we do in Kuldiga. One of the directions we work in Kuldiga is an international master program in service design, which we developed in cooperation with the Art Academy of Latvia, Riga School of Economics, Tallinn University, and Lapland University. Service design is a relatively new direction, which in our opinion has very good potential and could improve the quality of life to our inhabitants if used skillfully. And I think it is very useful for Kuldigas that here will be a master program, and it, I hope that we will attract scientists later too to our town, and it could be very useful for our municipality.
Perfect. And Mikael, perhaps there's a question of follow-on. You might have some thoughts about that. But there's a follow-on question about the types of people you would want to see engaged. Who were the actors? Are they local authority civil servants? Are they representatives from NGOs or citizens? How do you get that sort of diversity to bring that plurality of views together?
I think you need to work with all levels and actors to some extent, and not absolutely not only the experts. But I think we in our regional setting is as we often do lack the critical mass in each sector or in each city, a smaller village or wherever. I think we have the tradition of that we're also few on vast areas and also our cities. And I saw some in the flow on the chat here. Of course, a small city in a large region can be much more important than a large city among other large cities for the development. So you have to be very flexible in the definition of what is a city and what is a driver for change. But I think we are in regions where you have close between people because there are quite few. We have trust in each other, and we have close gaps between sectors and clusters, and people are moving around in different positions, both in research and or in universities and in the public sector and the business sector. So I think that for us creates some sort of unique innovation system where you really have connections between, we have strong clusters that also lay ground for new clusters. We have short ways between the politics and the academia and business, and we are needing cooperation over the borders in different ways. I think that creates some sort of dialogue, but it's important, and there I see, for example, that the EU money is really important because you need to also oxygenate this. You need to have influences from outside to not create small groups that just meet each other, to force people. And I think this challenge-driven attitude is quite important. And we have, for example, been engaged in an OECD study with all the 13 regions in the northern Sweden, Finland, Norway. And that is a way to bring in external competence, research, knowledge, not using your own universities, and create some sort of platform for continued dialogue. The tricky part, but there I see, for example, in many cities that they really work with dialogue, co-creation. I mean, I mentioned Umeå and the culture, year of culture as capital, and one of the bases was co-creation together with citizens. The change in the green environmental change is very much done in dialogue with different groups, but I think it's important to not go via others all the time, but to find those platforms. And that is, of course, easier in a smaller context than in a very large, big urban. But I still think it's important to do it because in the end, everything is about the people concerned.
That's a really powerful point. Caroline, I think back in the day, 1988, if memory serves, you were one of the pioneers of the whole internet economy when it was first coming through into Europe and particularly into Amsterdam and the Netherlands. So I'm interested in how you see the role of policy as a continuous design process. You had a great slide talking between the three and having design in the middle. Can you share a little bit more about the types of people that would get involved and how important design is to enable some of those people to come together, as Mikael and Inga talk about?
Yeah. Well, I think what's really important, and that's also part of why the City Science Initiative, I think, is successful currently, it's not only about the money.
Yeah.
Europe is not about money. Europe is about living together in a particular way where different scales come together. We are not big scale, parts. Someone in the chat also was talking about it. We are a compilation of a lot of local initiatives together. But there is something which is the European lifestyle, and I really appreciate that very much. And I also find it very important. So that concept of the European way of life was also very important when the internet started, because the American economy, but also the American way of life is very different from the European way of life. Its history is different, but also its current consistency, and well, now even more so. So when the internet came to Europe, so this was in the middle of the 80s, we had GreenNet and PeaceNet, and it was still global networks. Then it was like, there can be peace, world peace. But of course, then the money comes in. But still then, in that whole decade between, 88 and 98 or so, before the Big Bang, the new technology was made by designers. It's designers who said, hey, we can make a picture with a camera. With a phone, yeah? This used to be a phone, now it's a camera and a phone, and it's a music player. So the designers of the internet, the graphical interface, but also all the different way we interact, the Facebooks, the Twitters, those are all interface designs. It's done by designers. And they change how we behave. They change how we relate. They change how we negotiate our trust among each other. So design has already a major impact on our lives. They designed the cars. They designed the light switch. And at the time, it was really a challenge for us to formulate the European dimension. And so for example, the concept of community in Europe has a very different meaning than the concept of community in the States at the time. So I would be invited to the big labs like, from the Apple and the TJ Watson from IBM, to talk about what we think that a community is. And in Europe, a community has an historical value. It's connected to family ties. It's always city and regions in relation to each other. So we have a very specific concept of what is a community in Europe. Where in the States, it's a group of clients. That's what they call a community. Very different. So I think to realize, and that's also in the City Science Initiative, who are we as Europe? What do we need as Europe? And how can we make sure also the bad history that we have? We did create 2 world wars in Europe. So we are not only very nice. We have a terrible history in colonialism. We invented slave trade like it was never invented before. So to be aware of our history, our character, and to work with it and to give our youth, I really think we should talk much more about the youth. To give our youth a future with a new sense of Europe that they are proud to be part of and also dare to engage with all our diversity. I think that's what we need.
Yeah, I think there's powerful words. It's interesting to have seen Jack Ma, who's the founder of Alibaba's speech at the Bund conference a week or so ago. And he very much talks around the ossification in Europe, particularly around regulation of, say, finance and how the innovation will be driven by the young and people outside the cities. But it was a powerful speech, actually. So it's definitely worth digging out the transcription of that.
You know what's so interesting? I'm also involved a lot with data, also through my scientific work. We brought all these new data distributors together because the idea was always with the privacy law, GDPR, that we would lose business in Europe.
Yeah.
Because the American way of life is no privacy, you just take it all. And then we worked for 30 years to get the GDPR in Europe. Now we have the GDPR and it sets a new standard.
Yeah.
And the companies currently ask for more regulation of Europe, more GDPR.
Yeah.
So this European way of life needs to be defended,
Right.
needs to be designed, needs to really say this is a way of life. And also part of that is the courage to also look at the not bright side of ourselves.
That's really helpful. Well, unfortunately, we have to close here. It feels like the chat will continue on, but I want to hand over to Margit Noel. So if the audience can go back to the foyer and join the next program and session. But before we do so, I want to thank you, 3 superstar speakers, Mikael, Inga and Caroline. Really appreciate your time and insights, and look forward to catching up further on the chat function. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.